Last but not least is our world-famous staff scientist, Jim Laurie.
Just take your computer. I don't know. Take your computer. Yeah.
Well, if that's the way you feel.
Did you have any more you wanted to say?
No.
Okay. This has been pretty remarkable. I'm really glad to hear from Sophia from Mexico, and I'm really interested in this story from. I don't know much about the Rio Negro, but it's now I know a little bit. So, quite an interesting story. How do we think about the future? I guess the thing that I wanted to broach tonight was we don't talk about the extinction episode that we're in right now. And it started, how long ago did this extinction episode start? And I had a request. To put this slide up. About 10,000 years ago, we started losing the big animals on several of the continents in Australia and in North America and South America. And so we lost the poop on the land. And so we're in an extinction episode, but it's now beginning to accelerate. And so what does that mean for our future? How do we become people in a symbiotic mindset? We've been, in America particularly, we've been told that we're in competition with each other over and over again. How many people here feel like they're in competition? It's kind of it gets very frustrating. And so I thought I'd start with this picture right here. Does anybody know where that is? Have you ever seen a picture like that? Looks like maybe a moon of one of the planets. Who said Enceladus? Wow, that's pretty good. And what's special about Enceladus?
It has a methane hydrological cycle. Not water, but...
No. Wrong. But good start. Has anybody ever heard of Enceladus? It's one of Saturn's 60 moons. And if you took a picture of the other side of it, it looks like this. It's spewing out water, salt water, okay? And I didn't know this, but there was a satellite going around Saturn for about a decade that just went into Saturn. And they looked at a lot of these moons. And they actually tried to go through this mist. So Enceladus, it's snowing all the time, and that's why it's covered with snow. It's covered with ice. It's the brightest object in the solar system. So, what I'm thinking about is this may be the place where there is life. It's not a very big moon. It's about the size of maybe the Great Britain. But yeah, so that's one picture. So then, how many have ever seen this picture? What's the story of that picture? When was that taken? Christmas. It was Christmas Eve, 1968, one of the worst years in American history in a lot of ways. And they decided to send the Apollo up there, but they didn't have a lander, so they couldn't land. So they spent 4 orbits. They went around the moon, and you can see how there's not much to look at on the moon, but they're looking for a landing site for the next mission. And after 4 orbits, Borman's looking out this tiny little window, and he's saying, I want to turn it just a little bit, and he's got to tell everything he's going to do. And Anders is looking out the other window, and all of a sudden he sees the Earth rise. They hadn't even noticed it before. They were too busy. And everything kind of changed. Where's the camera? Where's the film? And they took that picture. It was Christmas Eve. And by that evening, they were reading from Genesis, and they were saying hello to all of us on the good Earth. And I think they were the first ones of all the astronauts that, you know, they felt like everybody I know is out there, and we're not home. You know, this became home. And think about that. What was the CO2 level that day on that planet? It was 331. Okay, just for in case you don't have that all in your mind. So let's go a little bit farther along, and this is the Arctic sea ice minimum. How many people ever crush ice and try to get it the right size for your drink and so forth? And to make your drink colder, you have to make the ice a little bit smaller. And you know the smaller ice cubes melt a lot faster than the big ice cubes. Well, in the 1980s, you know, there was, you know, it was kind of stable. In the 1990s, it started to accelerate, and then it really started to accelerate. And right now, we've got a pretty small cube. And this is summer ice. This isn't in the wintertime. It recovers a lot of it, but we're getting to the point where we might see ice-free summers in the Arctic. And so this is kind of an important number. For about 1,000 years, the methane levels in the ice cores say it was about 750 pp. This is ppb, sorry. So these are ppbs going up, and you notice it went way up above. It doubled. It's 2.5 times, and then it kind of flattened out for a while and started to run up again. And what I'm wondering is a lot of that coming from how the Arctic is changing, and you know, methane can come out of the Arctic, especially in East Siberia where the water is very shallow. And so, are we looking at a methane spike? You know, and it's been about 50 million years since that happened. You know, we've had the ice plugged up there. So could that mean a change in the climate? And what are we looking at here? Anybody got an idea where that was taken? California. This is in Yosemite, and there's a lot of redwood trees in Yosemite. These are really old trees, and I haven't heard the reports from how Yosemite's doing now, but it's been a pretty rough summer. And we had terrible fires in Montana this year. Does anybody recognize that picture? If you know, if I told you don't, but what's that? Mount St. Helens. All the trees are lined up. Had this huge explosion, and all these trees are lined up. And a lot of those trees are in Spirit Lake now, covering acres and acres and acres, and they've never really decayed. It's just a very slow decay process. But look at how things have recovered here. They were finding rodents in these areas, you know, within weeks of the explosion. And so that's what Mount St. Helens looked like. My grandfather was always very excited to take a picture of Mount St. Helens. And then that's what it looked like in 1980. About a 24 megaton bomb explosion. And you say, why am I bringing this up? What's this all about? This isn't, we can't do anything about this, right? And so then I started doing calculations on Hurricane Harvey. I went to college in Houston at Rice, and I got real interested in this hurricane this year because it's much bigger than any I experienced when I was in college and when I lived down there. And do you see the Gulf of Mexico? You know, I see Mexico. You know, this is just before it hit. It hit near Corpus Christi, and I think Florida's over here. But imagine, so I was trying to get the numbers on how much water came down in Texas and Louisiana, and it came to about 33 trillion gallons. And if you condense that water, that's energy escaping. And I started looking at it and found that the amount of energy that a hurricane uses to blow buildings around and raise the tides is less than 1% of the total energy released by a hurricane. About a third of it escapes into space. And with the CO2 in the atmosphere right now, about 2/3 of it bounces back down and stays in the atmosphere. So this is, you know, the Gulf of Mexico was 86 degrees when this was going on. Galveston Bay was probably 90. So this is the Earth that's got a fever, and it's trying to get rid of this energy. We're storing all this energy in the oceans, and that energy is trying to escape. And we're going to, you know, and that's why I think bigger storms are probably likely. But the thing that we can do here is when this water comes down is how do we keep it on the land longer and get it to recycle and recycle and recycle. That's the part with the water cycle. The oceans are trying to give us a gift of rehydrating the continent. This is near where I used to live. They had 52 inches of rain on the nearest rain gauge. The San Jacinto River comes through underneath where this drone is going. And this is the Interstate 10. And there's another road there in Channelview. And so you see that was, and I have no idea if the house that I built is still there. I haven't been out there in a long time, but think about 33 trillion gallons of water, and what if the purpose of Texas is to hold that water on the land as long as possible, instead of trying to get it back to the ocean and become salt water again? And you say, well, is there enough water on the Earth to really make a difference? So here we drain the entire Earth and put it into one sphere. And it's about 800 miles in diameter. It's a spherical shape. That could fill, you know, you say, well, the oceans are about 2 miles deep on average. It's like tissue paper on a globe that size. And the fresh water, it's not ice. And then this is the water that's actually accessible for drinking water for humans, easily for human use. Now, the interesting thing is the amount of water that comes off the ocean and lands on continents every year is not much different than this number. If we could hold the water on the land longer, like what, you know, the Beaver Plan, nature had this plan to hold the water on the continent as long as possible. And we've been more of drainers. And so there we are. How do you keep stuff to grow on the land? Well, you have to move nutrients. This came from a paper. It says, big animals are like nutrient arteries on a planet, and if they go extinct, it's like severing those arteries. So this is Chris Doty. The other guy on this paper that came out that Scientific American reviewed was a guy named Joe Roman, who spoke here last year, maybe. Joe Roman's here, and he's an expert in whale poop. And you notice here we've got the whales, and you say we've lost that nutrient cycle by about 77%. With Andromenous fish, it's about 96%. So that's your salmon and other fish. And now herbivores, 92%. What do we do with animals now? You know, we send them to the feedlots, and we actually have a poop problem. You know, we make a lot of methane in feedlots, but it used to be making soil out on the land. So this was, you know, back here, this was the Ice Age. The Ice Age, we were down, you know, 12,000 years ago. There was so much ice that we were down to about 240 parts per million, and the ice actually made Cape Cod. It pushed Cape Cod south, and the water levels were very low. I don't know if we want to go that cold. Some people say, well, if we go back to Ice Age, that would be a problem. And I say, well, why don't we get somewhere in between and then think about it, you know? Use our management skills. But I thought, well, where are we now? And this picture reminds me a lot of West Texas and parts of New Mexico. We've got our friends from New Mexico here, the Johnsons that'll be speaking tomorrow. And yeah, the desiccation age. We've dried out North America, we've dried out Asia, and so how do we rethink some of that? And I think this is, John Griggs came here from Nevada, 8 inches of rain a year, and Maggie Creek, after a lot of work on their grazing plan, the beaver showed up and they started digging down these channels 6 and 8 feet deep, and they didn't need any wood, although if they knew they were coming, I'm sure we would have put a lot of wood out for them to work with. But that's what really blew me away. And now the willows are starting to grow, and there'll be wood here. But in this area, after several years, they had so much muck, the water table rose 2 to 3 feet, and there's all this mud out there, and it was too much for them to work with. I figure this is probably 150 tons of carbon per acre over about 15 years, about maybe 10 tons per acre per year. Wetlands are a lot like that. And these beavers started moving upstream. Carol Evans has been kind of watching this. And so as you build these wet meadows, the rancher's got a place to take his animals when they've got really dry years, which they often do. And but yet when the snow melt comes down in April, and when they used to have floods, they've got so many of these little dams now that it just really breaks up the surge and the water stays in the area. Maggie Creek and Susie Creek. So that's kind of my poster. 10 years ago, I was wondering if that made any sense, and I believe it a lot more now than when I drew it. But the big thing about this is, and this conference this weekend, we've got a lot of people that will be talking about fungi in some way or another. You know, forests that work with fungi, how fungi affects the immune system of insects, and you know, so that's one thing. We have to learn more about fungi, and we have to learn more about insects. This is the first extinction episode that I know of where fungi and insects were disappearing, and even plants, you know. And so that's part of it. And then, of course, the rodents. The rodents are really, really important to the water cycle. And Texas used to have 1 billion prairie dogs, and they never had the kind of water problems they have now. They didn't have a desiccation age in Texas when they were prairie dogs. So the other thing is, what is the consciousness of other species? You know, that's kind of something we want to explore this weekend too. Is if you have acres and acres of a network here, what are they doing with all that brain power? You know, and you know what? We don't have acres and acres up here, and we think we're really intelligent. So, and you see here that a forest really depends on the fungi, and we're just starting. You know, a decade ago we just didn't really understand that. So we've got 5 kingdoms here, and what I challenge everybody to do is to think about their totem species in each kingdom. And you say, well, I don't know what protists are. And I know a little bit about bacteria, and we're just starting to find out that we have a microbiome inside of us that probably determines a lot about our own immune systems. And then fungi, and then we finally get, so I think you're going to see a lot of really good stuff this weekend. And so we go to, how do we cool the earth? Lynn Margulis is kind of my hero in terms of biology. And I thought, and then here's some more heroes that I have. These kids are going to speak tomorrow morning. 4 of them are. Annie and Jamila and Hayden and Linus will be here tomorrow morning, and so I hope everybody comes early in the morning. You know, it's like we're going to explore several pathways to restoring the lands and the waters, and they're going to start tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. But I wanted to show a video. I have a video too. And but I'll just, could everybody repeat this to themselves or actually out loud? There are those who are trying to set fire to our world. We are in danger. This is true. So there is time only to work slowly. There is no time not to love. You know, that planet there that, you know, maybe we feel like we're long, far away from now. The CO2 levels have reached 400, and the methane levels have reached 2,000 parts per billion. But that doesn't have to be. We have an extinction episode. It may involve us disappearing. You know, that may even be probable, but it's not necessary. It's just, it's time to try to do something different. And, yeah. Which one? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can do that. Dina Metzger. So and you can find it. It'll be out there somewhere. So, but so I will find out if we've got sound here. Where do we find the sound?
No, I think the problem is that we didn't have the sound plugged in.
Oh, I did it. So here.
It might be in the. That's on yours.
Okay, it's my fault. Yeah, so now it might cause a blast here.
Bacteria is product of symbiogenesis. And I want to give you a sense of a massive revolution in our thinking that has come across during the last about 20 years.
We don't have much.
She'd like to start trouble.
Lynn looks at the natural world and sees symbiosis, interdependence, not competition, not the survival of the fittest.
All life on Earth that is not bacteria is product of symbiogenesis. What does that mean? It means that very different sorts of organisms came together to make a new kind of being.
If you're making new science and having new ideas, you have to be passionate about them. You have to grab a hold of this idea and push.
It changed the rules of the game, and this is not popular ever.
She was absolutely spot on, and that made her a huge name in science.
Our view of man apart from nature, man exploiting nature, has got to change, because that is the basis of the environmental crisis. People are ruining their environment. These bacteria are producing an environment that's livable. So I think we have lots to learn from them.
So do we see that? I'll start it over again.
And I want to give you a sense of a massive revolution in our thinking that has come across during the last about 20 years.
She'd like to start trouble.
That's your son.
Lynn looks at the natural world and sees symbiosis, interdependence, not competition, not the survival of the fittest.
All life on Earth that is not bacteria is product of symbiogenesis. What does that mean? It means that very different sorts of organisms came together to make a new kind of being.
If you're making new science and having new ideas, you have to be passionate about them. You have to grab a hold of this idea and push.
It changed the rules of the game, and this is not popular ever.
She was absolutely spot on, and that made her a huge name in science.
Our view of man apart from nature, man exploiting nature, has got to change, because that is the basis of the environmental crisis. People are ruining their environment. These bacteria are producing an environment that's livable. So I think we have lots to learn from them. People.
Okay, this is a film that's coming out in the spring, in March or something like that. And I'll be the first one to. This book I've had for about 10 years, and I started reading it for this meeting. It turns out it's her explanation of how she came to believe what she did and how it affected science. So it's not a very big read, but the idea of symbiotic planet. How do we become a symbiotic species in this symbiotic planet? And that's our challenge. And wouldn't it be cool if we could pull it off? You know, So it's like, you know, and we could go home. See, and I really want to thank some of the folks that are getting us to think about, you know, remember how destitute everybody was back in the 30s during the Depression. There were people getting on the trains and looking for jobs and so forth. And when Roosevelt became president, within 6 months they had 100,000 kids out working in the Conservation Corps. And they were building the national parks, and they were working as teams, and they were getting 3 meals a day, and they felt like they were, you know, they were important again. And you know, we've got to look at this on a global basis, because there's no way we're going to, you know, take all the resources and act like there's not going to be any immigrants coming and stuff like that. So that's my opinion. But I really like the fact that we've got some people standing for insects, we've got some people standing for fungi, we've got some people standing for old growth forests, and fish. This is beautiful. So I'm excited about this weekend. If you come here early, you get to see the teenagers give their side of it, because they want to talk about consciousness.